This is a leading cause of death of children in this country. And we don't have to live this way. We sure as hell shouldn't die this way.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Steven Beschloss, and this is Six Questions. I hope you follow Six Questions wherever you get your podcasts. There are nearly 400 million guns circulating in America. That's more than one for every man, woman, and child. Add to that some 15 million assault weapons. Tragically, gun deaths and mass shootings continue apace, providing the most horrific expression of the scourge of gun violence. And yet the issue not only appears unsolvable, the ongoing reality of mass shootings has largely disappeared from media coverage. It's hard not to be discouraged by the failure of will to overcome this deadly epidemic. To help make sense of where we are, I reached out to the founder and former head of Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts, which is part of Everytown for Gun Safety, the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country. Shannon has also been an important example of what activism can look like, and she's written two valuable books about being an activist, Fight Like a Mother from 2019, and her best-selling 2025 book, Fired Up, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. So let's get started. Shannon, thanks so much for joining me. I've been looking forward to talking with you. You've been such an important voice, not just in terms of gun violence, but also in terms of grassroots activism more generally. So let me just jump straight in. According to the Gun Violence Archives, there's been 263 mass shootings in America in 2026 already, as defined by at least 4 victims that have been injured or killed. And yet, if you pay attention to the news, mass shootings have essentially disappeared. Has the media become numb to the scale of gun violence? And what does this say about where we are?
It's such an interesting question about numbness. You know, people always ask me, do I think Americans have become numb to this crisis? And my answer is no. I mean, you should talk to any parent. They will tell you it is not acceptable to put their child on a bus to school and wonder whether they'll see them again at the end of the day. No parent would accept that, and all parents are outraged by that. At the same time, I think in a nation where this happens so often, and not just mass shootings, to be clear, right? Because over 120 people are shot and killed in this country every single day. Hundreds more are wounded. The equivalent of many mass shootings many times over. I do think the media has run out of ways to tell the story. And I understand that, and I have empathy for that. But having conversations like this and making sure that it is top of mind, I think, is the only way to remind Americans this is a leading cause of death of children in this country. And we don't have to live this way. We sure as hell shouldn't die this way. No other comparative developed nation does. And that there are real solutions that we just haven't even tried trying yet.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me sort of as shocking why it hasn't been, why it still isn't at the top of the agenda for all the reasons you described. So let me go to the second question. In 2024, the most recent year for full data, to your point, there were over 44,000 gun-related deaths, including homicides and more than that, suicides. How would you describe the failure to do more? I mean, is the problem the number of guns, nearly 400 million, the absence of will among lawmakers, a growing sense of despair that anything can be done, the Republican control of Congress, or maybe most tragically, a president determined to make gun violence easier and more rampant?
All of the above, exactly everything that you just said. You know, if you go back into the 60s, there were about a third of the guns in circulation in this country. And it's a much different time in just several decades. The amount of guns that we've allowed to proliferate. People think about gun violence as we were talking about mass shootings, but it's really the daily gun violence in city centers, mostly with handguns. And what the gun lobby learned from, and they've said this, from watching the alcohol industry, from watching the drug industry, was that the worst thing that could happen to them was that they could be sued or stopped from this proliferation of guns. And so, as we know, in the 90s, they were able to pass legislation called PLACA. It's an abbreviation for a law that basically gives the gun industry immunity that no other industry has, right? You can sue someone over a poorly manufactured toy. You cannot sue someone for a poorly manufactured gun. And because they have this immunity, they've really acted with impunity for decades and have in fact helped write the laws at a federal and state level that encourage what has become a billion-dollar industry to become more wealthy, more profitable at the expense of Americans. It's the story of every special interest that's ever existed. Only this one has been the most deadly and also the most powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and it strikes me. I mean, it's cigarette smoking. There was a chance to file lawsuits against the makers of cigarettes. Gun manufacturers have remained out of that loop.
Yes, and that is something that Democratic presidential candidates like Hillary Clinton and others, Kamala Harris, have promised to stop. But every time there is a Republican administration that gets in power, and in this administration, interestingly, the president's own children are involved in the gun industry. And so we're not going to see a lot of federal regulation until the administration changes.
Do you think that's part of what's discouraged, lawmakers who might have been more active otherwise? Given all the other issues that they're coping with and dealing with, the Trump regime. Maybe that's also had an effect on distracting their focus.
Well, I think we forget what a seismic shift there's been in American politics. So when I started Moms Demand Action in 2012, a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, not one does. In fact, they're very proud of their Fs. So the process has been, how do we show lawmakers that there is an army equal to what the gun lobby created? This very vocal minority of gun extremists who believe any gun law whatsoever is an infringement on the Second Amendment. And it takes time to build that, right? So now Moms Demand Action, under the umbrella of Everytown for Gun Safety, has over 11 million supporters. We show up in mass anytime there's a legislative hearing. We are formidable. And that is why Democrats now have felt like they could have, our saying has always been, we can have your back or we can have your job. And that's been really effective, except it's the Republican Party, obviously, that has really been entrenched on this issue. Now, that said, after the shooting at Sandy Hook School in 2012, there was a gun bill put forward that would have closed the background check loophole in honor of the Sandy Hook School victims and survivors. It failed by a handful of votes in the Senate, mostly because of Democrats, who I mentioned at the time were more beholden to the gun lobby. Flash forward to 2022. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was put forward in honor of the victims of the Buffalo and Uvalde shootings, passed. First gun safety legislation to pass in a generation, with the support of 15 Republican senators. So while I know it often feels sort of like hopeless and some of us feel helpless, it's important to remember that incremental change leads to revolutions. And the system is set up for baby steps. As frustrating as it is, those steps are happening.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to the third question and really kind of go back in time for a moment. The federal assault weapons ban passed in 1994. That succeeded. It saw a significant drop in gun massacres. After it expired 10 years later in 2004, the mass shootings dramatically increased, making it clear what the impact is from banning assault weapons. There are over 15 million of these weapons in America. Why did these facts not matter more? Why haven't they? And why is a related thing? Why has the Second Amendment fanatics maintained such power to define the political reality?
Well, a few things. One is the reason that the gun lobby wanted to sell assault rifles is because they saturated the handgun market. So when you think about who is buying these 400 million guns, it's important to remember that it's about 3% of gun owners who own the vast majority of these guns, because they are truly extremist. They have been convinced that they should invest in an arsenal, and they're armed to the teeth. So it's not like every average American has an assault rifle laying around their
Right.
home.
There's more guns than every man, woman, and child, but
But
some are surely consolidating most of it
yes,
for themselves.
concentrated in a small amount of the gun ownership. And so the reason, that these are much more expensive than handguns, and that's why it was so important for the gun lobby to make them accepted by gun owners and in civil society, which I don't think you should have assault weapons in a civil society, and neither do any of our peer nations, right? Because they're not allowed. And so that's one thing. And the other thing to remember is the assault weapons ban, while we think was effective, if you look at the data, certainly there were fewer mass shootings during that time. The problem with it is that it was not very specific legislation. So you could essentially take the gun that was used in the Sandy Hook school shooting and make a few minor modifications, and it would be acceptable to buy and own, right? So some of the regulations were cosmetic, and that's what a lot of people had a problem with. And because of those discussions, it ultimately was not renewed. But I fully support and believe those lawmakers who want an assault weapons ban, which ultimately and usually means those guns that exist now would be grandfathered in, and anyone who wanted to purchase a new assault rifle going forward would be banned. There are nearly a dozen states now that have passed their own assault weapons bans, thanks to Moms Demand Action. That's where the work needs to be done in states until we have the right president and Congress that will pass an assault rifle ban.
Yeah, as I recall, the National Rifle Association has gone along with this expansion of assault weapons. And look, that worked. As long as they've had this maximum power. I mean, their influence has obviously waned. The membership has declined, revenues have declined. Controversies over their head, Wayne LaPierre, and otherwise. Does that help? I mean, does it make a difference now at all that their own lobbying power has waned somewhat?
Yeah, our theory of change when I started Moms Demand Action was we will shine a spotlight on the corruption and chaos being caused by the NRA. That they are not an average lobbying organization, that they are actually misspending members' dollars on things like Wayne LaPierre's Italian suits and trips to the Bahamas, and that they were, not a good actor. And that's what we did. Whether it was through social media or mainstream media, we filed lawsuits against them. We spent a decade really believing that sunlight was the best disinfectant, and we were right. They are now hemorrhaging political power and wealth. As you said, Wayne LaPierre was forced to resign in disgrace. I think what we did not account for in this theory of change is that there would be other gun groups to their right that would fill the vacuum of the NRA.
Right.
So if you remember when Donald Trump was first elected, Wayne LaPierre was at one of his very first cabinet meetings and was sitting at the table with him.
Yeah.
Flash forward, even though the NRA is essentially defunct, there are things like Gun Owners of America, Sports Shooting Foundation, these other groups that believe even more radical things about guns than the NRA did. Not only that, but every state has its own version of the NRA. So if you live in Colorado, for example, they're called the Rocky Mountain Gun Owners. And so it's kind of like all of these tentacles that you're having to do battle with. The NRA was gone, but now all of these other groups have sprung up. And so I think, you really have to have a president and a Congress in power that works on this at a federal level, as opposed to just eventually stopping the piecemeal at the state level.
Yeah, it's another reminder of another issue that matters at the midterms. If people are thinking about what are the issues that matter, well, how about the scourge of gun violence? I want to, I often like to sort of go back in time to try to look at the larger forces affecting American society, American culture. It strikes me that the gun violence, guns, they're so much a part of the history of American culture. Do you think the history of violence and the mythology around guns, especially in context of the Wild West, is a mindset that remains hard to overcome?
Oh, I absolutely believe that. When we did focus groups, we would ask questions to gun owners like, why does this resonate with you? Why is it such an important symbol?
Mm,
And it often came down to masculinity
mm,
and tradition and freedom, like all of the things that we associate with sort of masculine
yeah.
patriotism. But to your point, this has been something that we accepted as part of our society for a very long time: death, violence, slavery, the behaviors that you don't necessarily see in pure nations, and also what we have that
In what
no
you might
other,
call civilized society, by the
what you
way.
might,
Yeah.
yeah, so-called civilized society, but also what we have that no other developed nation has is the Second Amendment. Now,
Mm,
obviously, the Second Amendment was never meant to be exploited to have a special interest, make billions of dollars off of the deaths of Americans, and in particular children. But that's what it has been allowed to become.
yeah. Yeah. So the fifth question. So you founded Moms Demand Action in 2012 after the Sandy Hook killings, as you mentioned, building it into a major organization across the country to fight back against this daily scourge. How would you describe its impact, and more broadly, how important is grassroots activism to drive change?
Oh, I mean, I want to be clear. I was not very political. I knew nothing about organizing. I knew nothing about gun violence. I was the mom of 5 living in suburban Indiana
Mm,
who just could not believe that 20 children and 6 educators had been slaughtered in the sanctity of an elementary school. And I grew up in the 80s. I was so influenced by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I can just remember, what a visceral impact they had on me when they would pull a car up onto the high school grounds that had been in a crash, still had blood inside of it.
mm,
Like, it just was so powerful, not just the impact that they made, but all these women who were behind it. And so the day after the Sandy Hook school shooting, I put up on Facebook, I had 75 Facebook friends. And I put up a plea just saying, like, we need mothers and women to organize like MAD did in the 80s
mm,
and stand up to the gun lobby. My 75 friends shared it with their friends, and on and on. It was one of the very first political things that went viral on Facebook. And within a week, I was on the cover of USA Today. And, the day of that shooting, it impacted women so much. Many of our volunteers just walked out of their jobs, like walked out in their jobs and said, I have to do something on this issue. I can't, my soul has been
mm.
insulted.
Yeah.
And that was how I felt. I was a full-time volunteer for 11 years. And what we realized, I think in those early days, we thought, oh, we're just going to have marches and rallies, right? That's what we're going to do. And when we lost that vote I mentioned to you, it's called the Manchin Toomey Bill in the April of 2013.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, we're done. Like, we're all going to go back to our normal lives. We did this for 6 months. And volunteers reached out to me and said, wait a minute, my mayor, my governor, my state rep, they are willing to do something on this issue in the vacuum of federal action. But even more interestingly, they said, especially those in red states, my mayor, my governor, my state rep is doing the opposite. They're using this shooting as an excuse to pass the worst of the worst gun laws. We have to organize and stick around and pass good bills, but also stop bad bills. And so that is, for a decade, we created this grassroots movement that passed over 500 gun bills at the state and federal level, including school boards and town city councils. We stopped 90% of the gun lobby's legislation for 10 years in a row, right? Bills that would have armed teachers or allowed open carry. And we also changed the culture. This was
Mm,
something interesting that no one thought of, which was women make about 85% of the spending decisions for their families. How can they use that power to move the needle on this issue? And we started with Starbucks.
yeah.
They were allowing open carry in their stores. We got them to stop that. And then 500 other restaurants and retailers followed suit. So grassroots organizing in a democracy is the key to forcing change.
Yeah, and I'm going to pause on the fact that you are the mother of 5, which of course underscores for many, I was going to say women, but many people, like, how in the world would you have time to do any of that?
Well, that is a great question. What's the saying? If you need something done, give it to a busy mom. I really had to rely on my husband and the support of our volunteers to be honest, I was busier than I had ever been. I had a career, at one point, and this just was, I traveled a lot, and there were, every vacation was interrupted by some horrific shooting tragedy. And, not only was I threatened, but my kids and my family received death threats. So it was a lot to take on. They say, there's a very fine line between naivete and stupidity. I was straddling that line, thankfully, when I started Moms to Inaction. But look, if I lose my children, I have nothing left to lose. So I had no choice.
Yeah. So the urgency was not just an urgency of the moment; it's the urgency of a life, and particularly the life of a mother. And look, I have to say, I think we're in an urgent moment in the country for the reasons of gun violence, but for many other reasons as well. And so I'm always sort of working energetically to try to urge people to do what they can in whatever way they can to make a difference. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. So the sixth question, the last question, what advice would you give everyday citizens, people who are listening to this conversation, about what they can do to make a difference? And how hopeful are you that this dark period in our country actually can lead to an important expanded commitment to activism?
My favorite quote is by Alice Walker, and it's, "Activism is the rent I pay to live on the planet." We are in a society, for right now, a democratic society, and the only way that we can create change is by finding a piece of the work that's important to us. Doesn't mean you have to start a huge organization. Maybe you love data entry, or you do it for a job. That's the secret sauce of any organization, or people who enter data. Maybe you're retired and you can make phone calls and welcome someone into an organization. Maybe you love public speaking and you can go change hearts and minds. Whatever your values, abilities, and desires are that are unique to you, you have I think, a moral obligation to use those in the service of helping other people. That's really the definition of a community. And if we don't do those things, then we don't have community. And I hear so many people, particularly around this issue, say that they feel cynical. And I'll just be completely blunt with you and say, I think cynicism is an excuse for inaction. It's very easy to sit on the sideline and say, everything's so bad, I couldn't possibly make a difference. And I think I'm living proof of that. I was just an average mom who lived in Indiana, and I was outraged that the gun lobby was making our gun laws.
Yeah.
And, when you ask me about the country, there's certainly a lot of cynicism, even nihilism around that. And going back to my role as a mom, I always think of democracy as a sick kid, right? If your kid is throwing up and you've been up with them all night, it's 3 a.m, you don't look at them and say, wow, you are really sick, but I am really tired. I'm going to go to bed. I'll catch you at about 8 a.m. I really hope you're feeling better. No, you hold that kid's hand all through the night until you know they're better. And I think we have that same obligation with our democracy. We have to hold its hand until it's better. And that means getting involved in any way we know how.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, not just a cold or a flu. The illness facing the country may be more terminal than that. So,
yes.
So take the illness seriously. And I want to linger for one more minute on your point about cynicism, because it not only can be a reason why people are inactive, it also really plays exactly into those in power. They are hoping that they can overwhelm people, discourage people, convince them that there is nothing that they can do, that they don't have agency, they don't have the power to do something.
Yes, and too many of us have started to believe that on too many issues. And I just have seen firsthand that is absolutely untrue. It doesn't mean you won't get blowback. It doesn't mean it won't be difficult. But I do think that it is incumbent upon all of us to going into, do you want to work at the polls? Do you want to register people to vote? Do you want to have a hard conversation with an in-law? All of it matters.
All of it matters. And all of the work that you've done matters. So I thank you for the conversation on both fronts. These are, particularly with gun violence, they continue to be issues that not only need to be addressed, we struggle to be able to talk about them because it is sort of so overwhelming for a lot of people, but that's not a reason to look away. So thank you for staying focused. Before I let you go, lightning round, 6 more questions. It can be one word answer or it can be a sentence. Ready?
Yep.
What makes you happy?
Being in the pool with a glass of champagne.
You're the first person who said that. What makes you angriest?
Oh, injustice and cynicism.
What is your favorite word?
Googleable.
What living person do you most admire?
Congresswoman Lucy McBath.
What historical person do you most admire?
Abraham Lincoln.
And the last question, what gives you hope?
These conversations, that people still care and that they're not giving up.
I'm with you. Let's keep having these conversations. Shannon Watts, thanks so much for taking the time. Look forward to doing it again.
Thank you.